Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about Vitalina Varela, a Portuguese film named after the woman who stars in it.
Yes.
And she's a non-professional actor. Her name is Vitalina Varela. And the director, Pedro Costa, discovered her on a previous film he made, where she played a bit part. And her real-life story became the basis for this film.
Right.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I read a little bit around it. So the film on which he first worked with her was Horse Money.
Right.
So she had a small part in that, and then her actual story is that she didn't see her husband for years and years and years, and came to where he lived to finally kind of confront him. But it turned out that was 3 days after he died. And that is the start of this film. And so in this film, what she does is discover the kind of life that he led for years when she wasn't in contact with him after he left her. Though I should say this is fictionalised. And the film is permeated with feelings of grief and loss and anger that all come from her.
Yeah.
You know, the feelings that she has about the kind of life that she was, I don't know, denied, kept away from. It's a really interesting movie. I can't say that I loved it.
I
thought
loved
it was interesting.
I loved it.
Yeah. Well, I knew you would.
No, I was thinking actually, because, you know, I think the wonderful thing about cinema is that it's so varied, right? And I think, you know, the challenge for me, at least, as a viewer and as a critic, is to give yourself up to the work, right? To not go in with preconceptions of how a film should be or what a good film is, or, you know, to kind of just let yourself go in what the filmmakers are trying to do. And I think I found this so moving and so true. Yeah, you get a sense in the film of all of these dispossessed people, of all of these migrants who've gone to make a better life. And where do they live? They live in tunnels, in hovels, in rooms without light, and, you know, kind of houses where the thing falls on your head, the ceiling falls on your head. And you ask why, right? Like, kind of, you know, so, and there's a phrase where the woman says, you know, kind of, here, we're nobodies, right? Like, we had a 10-room house in Cape Verde, right? Kind of, you know, so on the one hand, I think the film is, like you said, about this woman experiencing grief because she spent her whole life loving this man who left her and wondering why he left her and when he would bring her back, and he promised a plane ticket, you know, and so on. So, and then kind of she goes to Portugal and discovers, you know, that he was basically a wanker, a lazy alcoholic, good for nothing, right? And she'd spent her whole life yearning, you know, for this sad figure of a man who she'd imagined as something else. So it's on the one hand this kind of longing for something, this kind of self-critique and anger at oneself for having been so stupid. At the same time, there's a whole depiction of, you know, the work of globalization, of migrants, really, and the life that they lead elsewhere, you know. And I think it's so beautiful because it doesn't bang you in the head with it. It lets you discover everything, and it gives the subjects of the film great dignity. They're beautifully filmed. I mean, I think it's very rare to see black people filmed so beautifully. You see their faces and you see the textures of their faces and so on. And the compositions and so on, they're like paintings, really. So I found it very moving and very sad and very true. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
You know, I was very touched at the end, where she's talking to this young man, you know, who's a homeless person and who scavenges, you know, to get food and so on. And he says something like, you know, I should find myself an ugly woman, really, because in the dark, you know, you can imagine her as pretty, you know. And then he says, well, but you know, but a pretty woman, you can imagine her as prettier, you know. Anyway, and he says, you know, and sometimes when there's love, things don't work out. And she says, no, when there's love, things must work out, right? And I was kind of like very moved by that kind of, by the gap in between those two ideas, which, you can see the truth in both of them, yeah, and nonetheless there's a gap, yeah.
Yeah, it's a film that's really deeply felt, and she has these essentially monologues. The film is incredibly slow, and the camera will. It's almost always. Well, I think it's always on a tripod, and it's almost always completely still as well. And you do get these painterly compositions that are built up, and there's this really strong use of a strong key light that you get with almost nothing else filling the scene in. So you get this incredibly high contrast, and almost everything up until the end of the film is set at night as well. Pretty much seems to be. So that kind of that adds to this. There's like a ghostly feeling to when she's kind of walking around her husband, or I suppose by this point former husband's house, and discovering, rather than kind of coming home, she's discovering what his life was, and she is a kind of ghostly presence in that. And then she has these monologues essentially where she speaks to her feelings, and sometimes she's speaking to him as though he's there, asking him questions. Who were you? What were you doing? This kind of thing. And I think in some respects she's directed the way it is sensible to direct a non-professional actor, in that she's not asked to emote heavily. And so there's a stillness throughout her performance that actually works really well, because you're never really clued into exactly what she's thinking. There's always an ambiguity or room for interpretation in what her mental state is, what she's thinking, and why she's saying what she's saying, which I think really works. But I mean, man, it is one of the most taxing films I've seen for a while, just in terms of the lack of interest that I thought, God, this is so slow.
Well,
it was really trying my patience.
I loved it. I was entranced throughout. I felt the film let you discover things, right? That if you looked attentively, you saw. So for example, right at the beginning of the film, when she comes out of the airplane and she's barefoot, right? Like, so here you have the airplane, kind of, the ultimate kind of modern technology, and here she comes barefoot, from another country, but from another world, another structure of feeling into this kind of new place. Little things like that I found so beautiful.
When she comes off the plane, it's the shape of her legs that the camera focuses on. They kind of bloated from, and you feel it's like a lifetime of hard labour has made her legs look the way they are. And the camera, there's two separate shots where they come into shot. It's like they're there for a reason. You feel what this woman's been through just through her legs and feet before you even really see her properly.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, I wonder if maybe the difference in our response is one of age, because I am also at that age where you look back and you think, well, who did you love? Who loved you? Was it worth it? Was it on? Did you know this person that you felt so strongly about? Did they change, or were you completely mistaken in who you thought they were? Did you love him, or did you love the idea of him that you kind of constructed in your head? The film, in a way, kind of asks all of those questions, right? And it's kind of imbued with failure, right? It didn't work out, and yet she loved you. There's no question, in the film, that she loved this man, right? She wrote him all these letters. She kept waiting for him to get her. She knew he was with somebody else, and yet, like, her feelings continued. And then she arrives and she finds that this is not the man who she thought he was at all, right? So I thought that was, like, so beautiful and poignant, and really kind of, it's a question that dominant cinema never addresses. I mean, the idea in the culture is that if you love somebody and they love you back, it'll work out. And this is, about something that it didn't work out, and actually of the uncertainties around it, right? Kind of, did he really love her? or was he using her? If he was using her, why did he return to build this house for her in 45 days, right? And actually, I also think that that's true to life. That as kind of you get older, you have all these questions about your life that there's simply no answers to, right? That either people have died, so you'll never know. Yeah, you'll never hear from them. Or actually they're alive, but you don't believe what they say, or you doubt what they say, or yeah. So I think the film deals with all of these uncertainties and ambiguities and sadnesses of kind of things that are a fact of life. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that she's from Cape Verde, which is in Africa, and it was a Portuguese colony. But the place that the film is set in Portugal is a kind of slum that is populated, it seems to be entirely by African immigrants.
Yes.
I don't know that we saw a single Hispanic sort of person of Hispanic descent in the film.
Yeah, it's a ghetto.
Yeah, so you're taken or people have been kind of displaced from this one former colony to what appears to be a kind of sub-colony, you might say, in Portugal itself, in mainland Portugal. And it's also interesting that, it's really evocative that the entire kind of ghetto shantytown it's like it's built into trenches, right? It's below ground. It's open to the sky. It's not like underground, but the ground level is above you the whole time. You see what I mean?
I do see what you mean, and actually I thought that was one of the interesting things in itself, because had the film ever gone outside, then you would have been in Lisbon, and you would have had sunlight, and it would have been beautiful, and it would have been a different kind of film, right?
Is that where it's set?
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
this is a slum in Lisbon, yeah.
Yeah.
Which, if you've been to Lisbon, it's beautiful and it's on the sea, and it's got all these gorgeous old buildings and the hills, and so it's significant that the journey of migration is also a kind of a journey into darkness, into underground, into being nobody and not being seen, and kind of wandering and living on the margins. And actually I think another thing that I loved about the film is that she talks to all of these men, and they're almost all men. I think there's one other woman that we see, and they're all drunks, and they've been drug dealers, and they've been in jail, and and she kind of just accepts that as a fact of life, really. That so there's no judgment on the individuals, but there's always this thing of Cape Verde, right? So there the house is being built, and there's sky, and there's mountains, and there's sunlight, and kind of where did these men go to, right? And why? I mean, you imagine it's poverty that drove them there, but kind of what you see is really horrific. Yeah. Horrific is the wrong word, but it's just so poor, right?
Yeah.
And so dark, and they all mention the dark and the cold, and they're all ill and frail, and the hand shaking, or it's a place that makes people sick.
Yeah, and it has that sense that Parasite had of Parasite did it so deliberately, staging class in terms of altitude. As you moved literally up in the city, you moved up in the world, and like in Parasite, they were even below where they lived. It was even below their own toilet. And in this, it's just you're constantly aware that you are below ground. You're living in these places that are cut into. They're all houses almost made out of caves, cut into the side of the ground.
Yes.
And there's a kind of unspoken tragedy in the fact that you spend all this time. Vitalina Varela is the character, spends all this time, waiting for an opportunity to get a plane ticket to go there to see her husband, and she's you spend all this time waiting, and where you end up is a slum, a shantytown, below ground again. It's
So and the film makes you ask all these questions that the film permits you to ask, or structures you to ask, but doesn't ask for you, right? So, did this man love his wife? I mean, was he embarrassed of the life that he'd made for himself, and is that why he didn't ask for her to return? I mean, those are all possibilities that the film, yeah, engages with and makes you ask, right? And I loved her, her presence, the dignity of her face, the stillness, but also kind of the suffering that you see, right? And actually, I think there's a line in that, because the film also deals with sexism, yeah? It's all these men, and she's the woman, and she says something like, when you bury a woman and you place her in the coffin, you never ask what she suffered, and you can't imagine what she suffered, right? So things like that, I just thought it was so beautiful, and I was entranced, right? And actually, before that, I was relieved because, kind of, I think this is the first Pedro Costa film I've seen, actually. And I've heard so much about him, and he's a figure in slow cinema and so on. And I thought, oh my God, this is going to be like one of those Bellatar 6-hour films. And then, when I looked on Mubi, I thought, oh, it's only 2 hours, so that's why I suggested we do it, because I knew I couldn't put you through 6 hours of slow cinema.
Felt like it.
Yeah, it didn't feel like it to me. I really was kind of entranced by it, and I think it's very beautiful. And I think the combination of the poverty on view with the type of lighting and filming, and everything is classic. You even have classic horizon points. The lighting is luminous and gorgeous, and I kind of there's a something really interesting comes out of the poverty of that which is filmed, the pro-filmic event, and then the beauty with which it is filmed. Yeah, I think it gives a kind of a dignity to this woman, really, and to her feelings and to her life. It makes it kind of, it makes it like a Renaissance painting.
Oh yeah, the visual quality is, these images look like Vermeers.
Yeah.
They're beautifully crisp as well. The images are incredibly beautiful, and what I loved as well is the its full frame Academy ratio.
Yeah.
But I didn't really realise that at the start. It took me a while to figure that out because partly that everything is at night, but also I think there's sometimes a bit of vignetting on the edges, left and right edges of the screen, of the frame. So that blends in to, because I'm watching it on a widescreen telly, so it blends into just what's black on the side. So you don't notice, the image just fading into blackness at the side of the screen. And just while I go, oh no, this is just full frame. And I don't know, I thought it was clever and really beautiful and really subtle how it happened, and I thought, God, this would have been incredibly beautiful to see at the cinema. I mean,
It would
have been stunning, but I also think it might have been even more boring.
No, I think actually it requires, a big screen. You would have been lost in this woman's face and in her story, much more thoroughly. However, I mean, again, I must say, like, thank you to Mubi for even allowing us to see it, right? I mean, in a way, I've been hearing about Pedro Costa like for 20 years, and I've never yet been able to see one of his films until now, and that's because they didn't play here, or I missed it when they played here, or they played here for a day and I didn't see it, or we now have these things available to us to see, and maybe not in ideal conditions, but I'm very grateful that we saw it. And actually, I must say, one of the great things about living in this moment, let's not take it for granted that these films are being made. I mean, if you look at, the last 100 years of cinema, so few films were made about women like Vitalina Varela, right? And so we now live in a context where kind of digital makes it possible, for a film like this to be made. It probably didn't cost very much. It's kind of, it's very beautifully made, right? It circulates, it's available for people to see. So I think this is one of those films where the onus is on the audience. Like, give yourself up to it, kind of, find out, because, if you watch it and, you say, okay, it's not an entertaining film in the traditional sense. It's not out there, to kind of to tickle your funny bone or whatever. But actually, I think it is there to do what art does, which is, partly to depict the lives of others, to kind of give you an insight into what they are, to kind of to make you aware of conditions of existence, that are not your own, and give you an understanding into them, and to give you an insight into other people's lives, really. So, that aspect of migration, of being across cultures, of poverty, of, undergroundness and kind of margins and liminality, right? And also then the interior thing about, what is love? And what is love in life? What does it mean to love, to have been mistaken in love? Yeah, kind of to understand what it is, and always kind of being confronted with another in which you can never be sure, right? I mean, that's a great film. Yeah, it makes you feel those questions, not just, yeah, and it makes you ask the questions. It doesn't ask them for you. So for me, this is a very great film.
Yeah, I think I estimate it slightly lower than you do. Yeah, it didn't make me feel as much as I wanted to feel. It didn't make me feel as much as I felt it could have made me feel. I did struggle to maintain interest. The thing that I found most engrossing about it was its imagery and the care that's gone into the composition and the lighting. And we should name the cinematographer, actually, because it's such impressive cinematography. Leonardo Simões is his name, and it's incredible the work that he's done. It's really beautiful. And also, I think there's some green screen in it as well. There's points where there's like a storm raging in the background, one or two points, and which I think is really beautiful. And actually, those parts reminded me of the lighthouse. There's a forbidding sort of nature is like not your friend in those scenes. I can tell you that it cost €600,000. That was its budget.
A pittance.
Not an expensive film. I just wanted to ask you, what did you think of the priest character? He's the other kind of major character, really.
He's the other major character, and I found that engrossing. So his backstory is that he was a priest in Cape Verde. They'd met before. There was an accident on a bus, and many people were killed or hurt, or they had their entrails falling out, and they were asking for last orders. And he, who was, I don't know if he was not yet ordained or didn't yet have a parish, refused to offer them kind of, what is it called, a last sanction or...
Last rites, was it?
Or the last
was it
rites.
that they didn't have... I thought it was something like they didn't have the right documents or something, and he could have ignored that, but he chose not to, and so it was a moral failing of his. That's what he deals with.
Oh yeah, no, so definitely a moral failing of his, but I don't think it had to do with that. I thought it had to do with himself. So
Right.
because what he did is he sent them on to the next village, which there was a properly accredited priest, rather than him giving them last. That's the way I understood it. She was there with her donkey. She witnessed the whole thing, and the bus crashed. He refused to give them last orders and sent them on to the next town where they could have received them from a proper priest, but they died on the way, the survivors that were left. But the key thing is that he's felt guilty about it his whole life. Yeah, it is a moral failing. It is kind of something that has bothered him for his whole life. And again, he's in this empty church where no one goes to anymore. You also feel that he's having a crisis of faith. And the church is, again, so dusty and dirty and deserted. It's just a whole bunch of, school chairs piled up in, again, what looks like a cave. You occasionally see a person there, right? So I think kind of, this is where I was saying earlier that maybe we're coming to it also from the vantage point of different ages, right? Because you can see how that character as well is, what has my life amounted to? Can I redeem myself? Can I kind of make up for, the mistakes that I made and, the hurt I inflicted on other people, right? It's his character also, like hers, is one that's kind of evaluating their life, really. Yeah, it's kind of, what kind of life did I lead? How did I end up like this? Kind of what mistakes did I do? Where did I go wrong? Or how could I have been so cruel or lacked understanding, right? Those are kind of, the questions that he's asking himself, as is she. Though, she at least has her husband to also blame, whereas he's got no one but himself.
Yeah. Rather like I was saying about her feet at the start. You see her feet and they kind of tell a story. His kind of stoop, his kind of arched back and his age. And there's his frailty and his shaking hand do the same for him. That all it speaks through. What was it you said before about boxing movies? That they're about people's conditions being made manifest through their bodies, through their flesh, in some sense. That's kind of what's going on here, certainly with him.
Boxing movies are all about working class people and capitalism and the American dream and, having to take the punishment for it, really.
Right.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. I really loved it. I think it's a great work of art. I think it's, at the moment where we're living this Black Lives Matter and where racism is, the hot topic, not only in America, but all over the world. Here we have a film about one of the most marginalized figures in all of cinema, which is a middle-aged black woman. Yeah. So I think, if nothing else, the film is important for dramatizing this life. But aside from that, it's also incredibly beautiful. It's a film that kind of, it really moved me. The questions that Vitalina Varela asks herself are the questions that I asked myself. And the film kind of becomes, a prism through which, through a look at Vitalina's life, you look at your own. And I think really that's about the greatest thing you can ask of art, really.
Yeah, I never thought of you before as a middle-aged Cape Verdean woman.
But inside I am. or there's not much difference between us.
Yeah. I've kind of said what my main problem is with the film, which is that I struggle to maintain kind of much interest, and it's very much on the slow side, and that maybe just wasn't my cup of tea last night. But there is an awful lot of beauty in it. I think it's one of the most visually beautiful films I've seen in a while. I love pretty much every image is careful and considered and so beautifully composed and lit. And as you say, the presence of Vitalina and just her face and the dignity that she kind of holds is really captivating. So, it has a lot of qualities.
Right, well, I highly recommend that you see it. It's on Mubi. It is a slow film, but it is also a great film. So just kind of give yourself up to what it offers, really. Yeah, lovely. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
All right, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.